Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
You're listening to a Frequency Podcast Network production.
He's in the building!
Drink the moment. Drink it.
I said, empty your mind.
Coquettish and coy. Ow. Ow.
What?
There's people that are dying.
The wickedly talented.
More than great. It was historic.
Crack is
Wow.
Oh, good for you.
I have to apologize.
One of the hottest.
Welcome back to The Reheat, a podcast that re-examines the hottest celebrity news and scandals of yesteryear and asks, how would we react to the same events if they'd transpired today? I'm your co-host, Sarah Sahagian.
And I'm Sadaf, your other co-host. And in today's episode, we're going to take a look at musician provocateur Marilyn Manson and ask simply why. This is an individual with a persona unlike any other, someone who was slammed with a series of sexual assault allegations last year, and yet remains, shall we say, unencumbered. As a warning, this episode will contain discussions of intimate partner violence and emotional abuse. If this subject matter is too triggering, please take care of your mental health and consider listening to one of our other episodes instead. Now, before we dive in, Sarah, tell me how you first got to know Marilyn and what you made of him.
I was a huge nerd, so I think I literally first learned of who he was in Bowling for Columbine.
I like that for you.
Were you a fan?
No. I can't say that I ever was. I spent a lot of time trying to understand him. I didn't quite get there. I will say, though, watching him in Bowling for Columbine, I felt like, okay, here's a smart guy. Like, I feel like there's something there. That was about as far as I ever got. And needless to say, I don't really feel that way anymore. Mm-hmm. Now, why don't we start by getting to know Marilyn a little bit and fill in some blanks? An Ohio boy, he was born as the incredibly plain Brian Hugh Warner. I think we can all imagine how much he despised the basicness of that and probably doesn't want anyone to know that was his name. His parents were God-minded, though not exactly God-fearing, and he himself attended a Christian school where he was taught that rock music was a sin and Satan's work. Eventually, he once claimed he was expelled for putting a dildo in his Bible teacher's desk. Make of that what you will. When he then began going to public school, he joined band, playing the triangle, naturally, and was bullied for being raised devout. But this was also when he immersed himself in all the music he was told he could never listen to, from Led Zeppelin to Kiss. As he told Apple's Zane Lowe in 2017, quote, "My parents wanted me to go to a Christian school to get a better education, probably not knowing that it would create this. Or maybe they did. Maybe they were fortuitous and they thought, we will create this monster people will deal with by sending him to Christian school." LOL. And that's really where Marilyn Manson was born. In the late 80s, he co-founded a band called Marilyn Manson and the Spooky Kids with guitarist Daisy Berkowitz.
I found that Marilyn Monroe and Charles Manson, about 5 years ago when I thought of this, were the two most memorable people from the 60s. And I thought it was interesting that things like talk shows put them on the same kind of celebrity status. And I thought that dichotomy of positive and negative, putting those two names together, represented what I had to say and what I was about.
Cute. Now, the band eventually parted ways, and afterwards, Marilyn became one of the biggest metal performers of all time. Paste magazine once said there were, quote, few artists in the 90s as shocking as Marilyn Manson, the most famous of the shock rockers. And he kept his roots, so to speak, basing his 1996 album Antichrist Superstar on his religious upbringing. Sarah, do you think his objective has always been to provoke, or is there more to his quote-unquote art?
I'm not a fan of his genre. I don't get it. It does not inspire me. It does not move me. It does not make me think. I don't really think that his analysis of society and Christianity is particularly deep. He's just not my thing. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, this is the tough part because I'm not a metal fan either, but some people are. And just because we're not fans, we can't really judge it. I get it if you were a fan. I get it if he was really great. And that's just not something that I see. But I think this idea of having a brand that's entirely based on shocking and provoking, I can understand it because people ate it right up. It was kind of like the Ozzy Osbourne thing I remember at the time as well. People like that. And I think that's a part of that sort of metal persona as well. And, you know, if you were that way, people would buy your records and they would listen to you and you would be on the cover of magazines and it would be good for you money-wise. I don't know that it was for us. I think that's the only thing, but it was clearly for some people. Now, something that often goes unmentioned about Marilyn is his 1998 autobiography called The Long, Hard Road Out of Hell. In it, he detailed his experiences with drugs, dysfunctional relationships, discord between his band members. It was co-written by music reporter Neil Strauss, who first solidified his relationship with Marilyn after writing a massive, glittering cover story for Rolling Stone about him. He followed that with another 17 glowing stories, and then, of course, the book. And rumor has it that Neil was paid quite a lot for it. As a side note, in journalism, you don't accept money from a subject and then continue writing about them. That's just plain bias. And I note this because Neil Strauss is a pretty big reason Marilyn's reputation became much more positive over time. He sort of elevated him from shock rocker to rock god, if you will. Now, this was obviously great for Marilyn, who is very careful about what makes it into the press. He's even said multiple times he would murder a reporter for misrepresenting him. Oh. Yeah. So let's dive into the book. Just a warning, this is going to get incredibly graphic, so feel free to skip the next few minutes. Now, in the book, Marilyn confesses to a series of disturbing events and assaults. These include burning off a groupie's pubic hair with a lighter, which he says he did with his friend and collaborator at the time, Trent Reznor. He also details spitting into groupies' anuses with his band, forcing them to, quote, confess their sins while strapped to a homemade torture device, and then playing a game that involved tricking female fans into drinking until they passed out and vomited. In the words of Chicago Reader reporter Jim DeRogatis, Marilyn is, quote, generally mistreating one or more women per page. Trent Reznor, by the way, denied these claims and has said he now dislikes Marilyn and has not associated with him in 25 years. Okay, Trent. But the most disturbing part comes in chapter 13, where Marilyn brags about a night at a Miami recording studio where a deaf fan excitedly comes to see him, sharing that she loves metal because she can feel the vibrations. When she arrives, Marilyn and his friends strip her, cover her in raw meat, and she is sodomized by the guitarist and the keyboardist. Then another member has a go. Then Marilyn and his guitarist urinate on her and then push her into the shower, at which point Marilyn also throws a dead salmon into the stall. The book includes zero perspective from her, makes no mention of why this even happened or how, though Marilyn insists it was consensual. Instead, any of those points, Neil writes in Marilyn's words that it was a, quote, science project designed to see if a white band that wasn't rap could get away with acts far more offensive and illicit than Two Live Crew's dirty rhymes. Despite all this, and I'm only sharing a small portion, the book received mostly rave reviews. Marilyn was compared to, of all people, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Franz Kafka, and Ayn Rand. Many music critics dubbed it one of the greatest music memoirs of all time, with the Austin Chronicle's Mark Savlov calling it, quote, a terrific rock and roll saga in the epic vein. Sarah, how the hell are we meant to process any of this?
Rockers are given permission to do all the things that people who have been raised under patriarchy and toxic masculinity wish they could do. So it's just like a heightened level of the toxic masculinity that exists on a daily basis, because as we all know, sexual assault is really common. It is very common to objectify and degrade women. What he's doing on a nightly basis is just a slightly more theatrical version of what is quite normal. And it seems like that's why he's being lauded, because all these critics were thinking like, this is my fantasy, right? I wish I could degrade women simply because I made music that they enjoyed. The rock star fantasy and that cultural construction is synonymous with abusing women. Like, it's very hard to find an example of a rock star who hasn't either been proven to be an abuser of women, or there have been at least significant credible rumors that they are an abuser of women. So I think all these critics are complicit, but like that's the very nature of the rock star. The rock star is almost defined as somebody who is a misogynist.
The thing that gets stuck in my head is just the fact that all these people were raving about it to such an insane degree. I mean, did they get to chapter 13? Like, why do you think they're just ignoring that piece of it?
I think that this book is so rife with references to abusing women that I'm sure that's part of what appealed to them. Because if you take away all the abuse of his fans, how much of this book is left, right? Like, how much of it is there to say, oh, this is a literary triumph if you just completely take away all of those egregious incidents?
That's so true. And I wonder, too, if it kind of makes him seem even more, and I hate to use this word, but godly, because here he is presenting an even more unrealistic standard of what you can be like if you look like him, if you sound like him, if you're artistic like him, whatever, you can have this kind of access with women. When I don't know that that's even something that a lot of people would want if they had that kind of access. But if you're comparing him to F. Scott Fitzgerald and Ayn Rand, you're putting him on a very massive platform. And I don't know, I can't really make sense of that. So I think you're right. I think it's part of that shock value.
I mean, as an aside, F. Scott Fitzgerald was also horrible to his wife, Zelda.
That's a great point.
I mean, we constantly exalt men who mistreat women. And like, those are usually the people we think are the best artists. Like, It's almost like there's some causation there that the more you abuse women, the more we kind of take you seriously as an artist.
Yeah, that's a very good and sad point. Now, from there, Marilyn's star only grew bigger and more far-reaching. Go figure. He crossed over in endless ways, working with everyone from DMX to Lady Gaga to Eminem. He was in David Lynch's Lost Highway, appeared on everything from Eastbound and Down to The New Pope, to even the ABC fantasy series for children, Once Upon a Time.
Once Upon a Time.
He even long planned to direct his own movie, an abstract Lewis Carroll biopic, to no one's surprise. He had his own absinthe called Mansynth.
That's kind of funny.
Yeah, it is. I'll give him that one. He did watercolor. He held art exhibits across Europe. He even started his own so-called art movement, which he personally dubbed Celebritarian Corporation, the slogan of which was, quote, "We will sell our shadow to those who stand within it." Okay.
Oh my God. Fuck off.
Yeah, I feel like he's one of those guys who's just constantly insisting he's got a lot of depth. Like, there's a lot more to him. Now, like he always wanted to, he defied genre. We can admit that. In music, film, style, it was all there. But things hit a fever pitch when it came to his newly glistening reputation in 1999 after the Columbine High School massacre. The shooting, which was perpetrated by 2 grade 12 students who committed suicide afterwards, led to the murder of 12 other students and 1 teacher. At the time, and this will sound outrageous now, it was the deadliest school shooting in American history. Now, why do I mention this? Because when Columbine happened, there was a very 1 Million Moms-esque uprising in the media and PTAs across the country. They blamed rock and rap music, including Marilyn, who was at his peak popularity at the time. The message was basically that impressionable children were going home, listening to his music, and being influenced to be violent and anarchic. Now, in 2002, director Michael Moore released his Oscar-winning documentary, Bowling for Columbine, which you will remember very well if you were absorbing any kind of pop culture at that time. In it, Michael delved deep into the real things that led to the massacre, rampant gun violence in the country, which is still an issue today. He interviewed Marilyn for the doc, and this was a moment where, as we were talking earlier, I personally felt like, okay, there may be just some depth to this individual, and I didn't know about his memoir at the time. I think a lot of people who probably watched that documentary didn't. He spoke with so much clarity and intelligence about media-led fear and consumption versus his own image. At one point, he notes that the same day of the massacre, President Bill Clinton ordered more bombs in Kosovo than any other point in that war, and says, actually, Clinton has far more influence than a musician, and that's what we should be talking about. He called the media's focus on him over this a, quote, campaign of fear that will keep people consuming. Here's a clip.
Definitely can see why they would pick me, because I think it's easy to throw my face on a TV because I'm, in the end, sort of a poster boy for fear, because I represent what everyone's afraid of, because I do and say what I want.
Okay, I'm going to say something here that I want everyone to understand. I am saying, like, with nuance. I do not think that Marilyn Manson is the chief reason that Columbine happened. It's a tragic event. And I think the Million Moms probably should have focused more on gun control. However, I do think that he isn't holding himself accountable for promoting toxic masculinity, which is something that did contribute to Columbine based on what I've read about it. The culture of toxic masculinity that encourages young men to turn to violence, to turn to guns, to assert dominance with violent means, with guns, with weaponry. That absolutely was promoted by an artist like Marilyn, who was violent against women, admits that in his memoir, right? Who incorporates some pretty terrifyingly violent imagery into all sorts of aspects of his image. I mean, the guy who said that he would kill reporters for misrepresenting them, right? He suggests that the way to deal with your problems is through extreme and disproportionate violence, right? Whether or not he meant that, a lot of aspects of his image suggest that, and children whose brains are still developing, like, they might actually just believe you. They often do when you say something, take you seriously. So I think that he and everybody else who promoted this culture of toxic masculinity should be held more accountable than they would like to be. And I think that what he said is a little bit of a cop-out. Because no, I don't think he's the only person who's accountable. But do I think that just like Charlton Heston is held accountable by Bowling for Columbine, that maybe Michael Moore should have pushed harder when he interviewed Marilyn Manson? Yeah, I actually think he should have, because this guy does glorify violence with his public image. So I don't think the Million Moms, I think it's a case of being somewhat right for the wrong reasons.
If we just look at his book, I mean, the stuff that he was schlepping, and so proudly too, and still has, because his brand hasn't changed over the years, it's not crazy to think that the young kids who were listening to him at the time might have thought that it was cool for more reasons than just, oh, I'm going to hang a poster on my wall. But yeah. Now, you might be wondering during all this time, what was the state of Marilyn's personal life? You would think it would be a disaster, but no. Marilyn Manson has never struggled with the love department, believe it or not. When he was at his peak, he was engaged to actress Rose McGowan from 1999 to 2001. She would suggest to Howard Stern shortly after that they parted ways because he was unfaithful and too deep into drugs, while he would also suggest to Howard later that it was because she was vapid and not the kind of girl who could, quote, handle him.
Oh my God.
For the record, after they split, she ran off with the patio furniture. I just want to note that because it's one of my favorite breakup details of all time.
You gotta have a nice outdoor space. Like, take that with you.
You really do.
Take that with
God
you.
knows Marilyn Manson is not going to value that patio furniture, okay?
Does he go outside? He strikes me as like an indoor person.
His pallor would suggest otherwise, yes. Now, you'll remember these two best from their appearance on the 1998 MTV VMA red carpet, where she wore an infamous see-through chainmail dress. At that time, it was shocking. Now, I think it's very much groundbreaking. Just a fun fact. Now, Marilyn would later go on to date burlesque dancer Dita Von Teese in 2001. They married in 2004, but were divorced 2 years later, where again, the blame was placed on his infidelity and partying lifestyle. Soon after came Marilyn's relationship with actress Evan Rachel Wood from 2007 to 2010. When they met, she was 18 and he was 36. That's twice her age, in case you want to do the math. What I want to note here is that with each relationship, Marilyn had a very visible impact. I remember this as I was watching him in the tabloids over all this time. You know, these women would change their aesthetics to match his, from Rose's revealing gown to Dita's all-black wardrobe to Evan's pinup style. It was what clearly he preferred. And Evan actually did say all these years later that that was a thing in their relationship. He had a specific way he liked the women he dates to look. And if you wanted to be with him, that's what you were going to do. Now, what I struggle with here, Sarah, is these are some really amazing and talented women. I mean, Rose has had her controversies here and there, sure. But what do they see in Marilyn? Especially because he has all the same shitty patterns and always has.
I really don't know. But amazing women usually end up with shitty men. Like, the more amazing a woman, usually the shittier her partner is. This is like, especially in Hollywood, like not necessarily in normal life, but especially in Hollywood. He's confident. He's really good at bullshitting you and making you think he's smart, right? Like, he's very good at pulling the wool over your eyes. In that conversation he had with Michael Moore, just returning to Bowling for Columbine, a lot of what he's saying is nonsensical. It sounds good, like it's poetic, it's interesting, but it's actually means nothing. Like, it's nonsensical. It's like, I am the face of fear because I do what I want. I'm like, what does that even mean? What does that mean?
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
I think he might just be really good at seducing people with his enigmatic nature. I mean, if you are a rock star, you are literally, your image is larger than life. You get to be on a stage every night. That gives you a platform. It makes you seem more compelling than you actually are in many cases. Like, there is a reason why all rock stars usually bat out of their leagues. If you see some of the women certain rock stars who should not be named end up with, you're like,
pretty much all of them.
Yeah, that's because you're a rock star.
Yeah, you're so right. And it's always so disappointing. And that Bowling for Columbine clip, yeah, I see it that way now all these years later. And I also think what's interesting about that interview is he's oozing ego. And when he mentions the campaign of fear, he's suggesting that the media has sort of just run with that idea. But he's created it. And I think he knows that and he loves that. But I think there's a part of him that likes to kind of run with the thought that, well, whoever is taking part in this and consuming it, that's their choice. They decided to be a part of this. I think it's different when you're in these relationships, but I think he looks at it the same way. He seems to treat the women he dates like they're groupies, and they're interchangeable, and they're objects, and they're just people who are there because they're sycophants and they are obsessed with him. And he doesn't actually value them in a real way that you might with somebody who you actually love. Is Marilyn capable of love? I don't know. I struggle with that thought. Now, before we dive into the real tough stuff, because trust me, it gets worse, why don't we take a little break? We'll be right back. Now let's fast forward to September 2020, when 6 of the women who have come forward with allegations of abuse against Marilyn gathered privately to discuss their experiences of abuse at his hands. They ultimately decided to take action after swapping stories. A few months later, on January 21st, 2021, California State Senator Susan Rubio wrote to the director of the FBI and the U.S. Attorney General, asking them to investigate allegations several women had made against Marilyn. Things were kicked up a massive notch when, on February 1st, 2021, in an explosive Instagram post, Evan Rachel Wood directly accused Marilyn of extreme emotional, physical, and sexual abuse throughout their relationship a decade before. In her post, she wrote, quote, "The name of my abuser is Brian Warner, also known to the world as Marilyn Manson. He started grooming me when I was a teenager and horrifically abused me for years. I was brainwashed and manipulated into submission. I am done living in fear of retaliation, slander, or blackmail. I'm here to expose this dangerous man and call out the many industries that have enabled him before he ruins any more lives. I stand with the many victims who will no longer be silent." Now, I want to note, Evan came forward about the abuse 2 years before, but only after speaking to the others did she feel comfortable to say who had committed it all. In 2018, she testified before a House Judiciary Subcommittee as part of an effort to get the Sexual Assault Survivors Bill of Rights passed in all 50 U.S. states. She said at the time, quote, "My experience with domestic violence was this: toxic mental, physical, and sexual abuse, which started slow but escalated over time, including threats against my life, severe gaslighting and brainwashing, waking up to the man that claimed to love me, raping what he believed to be my unconscious body." In 2019, she testified before California legislators on behalf of the Phoenix Act, a law that she created, which extends the statute of limitations for crimes involving domestic violence and which passed in early 2020, just in case you're wondering how powerful it can be when victims step forward and share their stories. Here's a little bit of her testimony.
When I was a teenager, I met a man. I looked up to him in many ways and felt like we had a special bond, and I had no intention of it turning into something romantic. When it eventually did, I wasn't sure how to stop it, as he had a certain charisma and power, and I quickly surrendered to his charms. In the beginning, he treated me like a princess. I was smart, but a smart 18-year-old is still an 18-year-old, and I thought I had fell in love. It wasn't until much later that I realized everything he had told me was a lie and part of what is called the grooming process. He'd hidden a terrible drug and alcohol problem from me. He moved very fast in the relationship, asking me to move in with him almost immediately. There was a certain way he wanted me to look, otherwise I would endure name-calling and ridicule. He cut me off from my close friends and family one by one by exhibiting rage in some form or another when I was in contact with them. The only way I knew how to calm him was to give him what he wanted, which was me all to himself in total isolation. He had bouts of extreme jealousy, which would often result in him wrecking our home, cornering me in a room, and threatening me. I witnessed my abuser threatening people with force or legal action if he worried they would expose him. He bragged about being able to have people killed because he was allegedly friends with multiple gangs, and I watched him illegally collect data on people that he could use as blackmail. By the time I realized I was in a bad situation, I felt completely trapped and terrified for my life.
Soon after this, 4 other women posted allegations against Marilyn. In a quick succession, he was dropped by his record label, manager, and talent agency and fired from 2 TV series he was slated for. Only after losing the work, of course, did he make his own Instagram statement, denying all of the accusations in one swift, efficient move, writing, quote, "Obviously, my art and my life have long been magnets for controversy, but these recent claims about me are horrible distortions of reality. My intimate relationships have always been entirely consensual with like-minded partners. Regardless of how and why, others are now choosing to misrepresent the past. That is the truth." Sarah, what do you make of this? And what do you think ultimately led to Evan actually stepping forward? Because over the years, she said that she wasn't ever going to say the name of her abuser because she was afraid of him retaliating.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not privy to the details of her personal life. It could be that she felt an obligation to protect other people from him. It could be that as she got older, she felt more confident, or she felt like she had more protections for herself in place. She is participating in creating legal protections for people who suffered what she suffered. And perhaps she felt that explaining who had done this to her and how influential he was would bolster her claim that we need more legal remedies to even the playing field. I mean, usually when people are abused, they feel like their abuser has more power. This is a very heightened version of that because he was literally a rock star with tons of connections. But that is a pretty universal feeling. So I don't know what emboldened her or what changed her mind and inspired her to reveal that it was Marilyn Manson who had done this to her. But I mean, I really do commend her for her bravery. So, I mean, she's a hero.
I think so too. And I think it's so powerful that she used what happened to her. And by the way, she didn't have to say her story. She didn't have to say anything about it to anybody, but her choosing to talk about it repeatedly, so publicly, in order to get this law passed is just so incredible to me. And I think one of the reasons she did ultimately decide to name him, and I mentioned this earlier, is because she met with the other survivors, and one of them actually said that they felt like they'd formed a sisterhood. And I think there's a real beauty in that, as sad as it is, the way that they ended up building a connection. Mm-hmm. And I do want to state, by the way, that in Canada, the rules are a little bit different. There's no statute of anything when it comes to domestic violence. The tricky thing here is the definition of domestic violence is different whichever province you're in, and that can be very, very sticky. So it's not easy for people who are experiencing abuse and want some justice anywhere. Now, to some, Evan's allegations may have seemingly come out of nowhere, or at least that's what the detractors obviously love to say, but the breadcrumbs are there. In a 2009 article in Spin, Marilyn said of Evan when she was just 21 years old, quote, "I have fantasies every day about smashing her skull in with a sledgehammer." Okay, Marilyn. But there's more shady incidents decorating his past. When Me Too was in full swing, a police report was filed against him citing unspecified sex crimes that allegedly took place in 2011, but the case was dismissed after a lack of evidence. Then there was the time in 2018 when actress Charlene Yee said in a since-deleted tweet that Marilyn had visited the cast of House while she was on the show, and he was a fan, but he harassed just about every woman, asking us if we were going to scissor, rhino, and called me a Chinaman. 2001, he was also charged for sexually assaulting his security guard and was accused of felony fourth-degree criminal sexual conduct along with misdemeanor assault and battery, but ultimately got off with a fine. And he settled with the guard. Since Evan stepped forward, a lengthy list of over a dozen women have made abuse allegations against Marilyn, including his former personal assistant, Ashley Walters, Sarah McNeely, Ashley Lindsay Morgan, Karen Ward, Ellie Roselle, and Game of Thrones actress Esme Bianco, who joined Evan in court to testify toward the Phoenix Act. I encourage you to read her 2021 story in The Cut. It's really moving, but you should also prepare yourself. It's graphic. In it, she shares how Marilyn would mass mask abuse as art. And she calls him, quote, the monster who almost destroyed me. Now, in a later Instagram post, Evan revealed more details of the abuse she suffered at Marilyn's hands, which I do want to highlight, and I keep sharing these specifics because I believe it's important we look at abuse head on. There's no glossing over it. I also think for a lot of people, it's not real to them until they just hear how bad it is, unfortunately. And what she states is super similar to what a lot of the other victims described. She said Marilyn was anti-Semitic toward her, drawing swastikas on her bedside table when he was angry with her. He would use the N-word and you were berated if you didn't laugh when he did. He often threatened to kill her and her family and himself if she tried to leave. He downloaded spyware onto her phone and computer. She said she had never been more afraid in her life, that she, quote, wanted to die the entire time. She has said she waited to say Marilyn's name because she felt overwhelming shame, had a fear of being judged by society and of retaliation by him, and went through intense therapy to cope with her trauma, having been diagnosed with complex PTSD, something several of his victims have actually said they're living with. In a story for People, Ashley Smithline also shared details of the abuse she experienced, which rang incredibly similar, again, to what Evan reported. She said that Marilyn would bite her, whip her, force her to do a blood pact, and would lock her in what he called the, quote, bad girls room, which was a glass soundproof room. And whenever she pissed him off, he would push her in there. In that story, Ashley said when she met some of the other women in 2020 to swap stories, quote, it was like looking at a room full of myself. All of the abuse, the gaslighting. He just has a very specific pattern. Sarah, how is it possible to accuse these women of lying when there is a clear pattern? And Marilyn Manson himself has said that he created a, quote, campaign of fear around him to boost. What is there not to believe?
Not believing them is preposterous. Like, the only way you don't believe him is if you convince yourself that this isn't true out of a bias towards Marilyn because you want to continue listening to his music without feeling guilty about it. I mean, he said in that magazine he wanted to kill Evan by bashing her head in with a sledgehammer. Yeah. He wrote that memoir about how he physically degraded all of his groupies, right? Like, I don't know if it's that people believe that, like, they're held to different standards and it's okay if they do these things, or if they somehow believe that they're telling the truth and that these things didn't happen. I don't know what it is. It's absurd to think all of these women are lying. Their stories are credible. There is a pattern. Marilyn friggin' admits to doing some of this stuff when he wants to. It's just when it's inconvenient to admit to it because there could be legal ramifications that he starts denying being abusive.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the Esme Bianco story. I mean, he told her he wanted to shoot a music video with her in it and that he used it as his guise to abuse her. And the music video, I believe, never even came out. And it's like you were saying earlier, Sarah, the way that younger people can be influenced by that. They can see that he can get away with it. So why I could get away with the same thing if I gave it a shot. I mean, I can't. I'm female. I'm not white. But Marilyn Manson can get away with it. Mm-hmm. Even though he likes to dress like a vampire or a zombie. I don't know. He's so much on his own and yet not at all. Because like you said, this is so common. And I think so much of this is rooted in misogyny where people still struggle to believe women when they are talking about abuse that they've suffered.
Isn't that the epitome of white male privilege? That you can admit to being abusive when you want to, when it's cool. And then when it could actually hurt you, you're allowed to deny it. And then people believe you, even though you've already admitted to it for cachet years before.
Yeah, I think that's why for me, this is one of our tougher episodes we've done because it's, the more that you go on, it's tougher and tougher to absorb the fact that he's never paid for it and he might never, frankly.
Yeah.
But now, Sarah, in case you're wondering, Dita Von Teese and Rose McGowan did address these allegations. In February 2020, after Evan named him, Dita said in a statement, quote, "Please know that the details made public do not match my personal experience during our 7 years together as a couple. Had they, I would not have married him in December 2005. I personally don't love that second line because it's not that easy to leave an abusive partner. And I think Dita's statement sort of implies that she would have seen it and therefore she would have left. It's not that simple. But to her credit, she does add, quote, "Abuse of any kind has no place in any relationship. I urge those of you who have incurred abuse to take steps to heal and the strength to fully realize yourself." I also want to play Rose's comments that were made around the same time because I thought they were just so beautifully put and impactful.
I'm only sad today and disgusted. But I am mostly proud. Proud of Evan Rachel Wood and the others who've come forward against Marilyn Manson, my ex. When he was with me, he was not like that, but that has no bearing on whether he was like that with others before or after. It takes time to come forward. And again, I am proud of these women and anybody who stands against an abuser. They steal time. These are time eaters. They steal lives. They steal hopes, dreams, freedom, sexuality, love. And I'm also here to say to the Hollywood cult leaders that have employed him and sanctioned him, and Interscope Records and Sony, who was with him during the Evan period, you know you are accomplices. All the PR managers, agents, lawyers, the Hollywood cult must be stopped.
You know, it might sound funny that she says Hollywood cult leaders, but the more that you think about it, when you hear this story, I don't know, I kind of like that phrasing.
It makes sense.
Because she's fucking right. Yeah, it does make sense. I mean, this man, let's just look at the timeline that we've just gone through. He got more work than he ever had with so many people who were very established in so many genres, so many art forms, the more vile that he was. Mm-hmm. Sure, he was dropped by people, but he was dropped by them after the allegations started to mount and mount and mount. And it was the main headline for days. They kind of had to, because they would have lost money if they kept him on. I mean, we say this all the time, but that's the bottom line, isn't it? I mean, So Sarah, do you think there is, I mean, I feel bad even asking this question, but do you think there is a right way, quote unquote, for former partners who were not abused, who didn't experience the same situation to respond?
I think this is a difficult situation. And because I've never been in the situation where, you know, a celebrity ex of mine was accused of abuse and I've been asked to respond, I think it would be hubristic to say, like, I know how I would respond. Like, while I don't think Dita Von Teese's response is perfect, I do also want to say that, like, I don't know what the terms of her divorce were, right? Like, I don't know if she's worried about those being affected. I don't know if she has a non-disclosure with him. I don't know if she's friggin' afraid of him, like physically afraid of him. Like, we don't necessarily know. If a man has been abusive with other partners, that could have impacted how he treated her, even though she says he wasn't like that with her when they were married. That doesn't necessarily mean she's not afraid of him. And that maybe he wasn't abusive in other ways. So I think I'm going to refrain from judgment about what she said. And like, while I feel like Rose McGowan's statement is excellent and worthy of praise, I'm not going to condemn Dita. And usually I love Dita and I love her art.
Oh, I love Dita. I still love her.
Like me, she's part Armenian. So I mean, I will always have a soft spot for her for that reason. Yes, she is.
Oh.
And she's done some great advocacy for people living with HIV/AIDS. There's a lot she's done that is really worthy of praise. So in this situation, I think I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt and just say, like, this is a very, very hard predicament to be in.
You make such a good point, because it really also just doesn't matter what happened before. That's not the point. I think in our experiences, when you're not famous, nobody goes back to the other exes and asks them what their experience was. It doesn't work that way. And I think, again, it ends up just putting the women under the microscope and studying them and what is the right way that they should be behaving and performing. And it's another moment where the guy just fucking gets away with it. It is not held to task. So I think that's a really great point.
It's one of the worst byproducts of Me Too, which is a movement that I'm very grateful for, but that anytime a man is revealed to be an abuser, we're constantly asking, like, his former partners, as well as his colleagues and his friends, to account for his behavior and to make statements. Like, I mean, I remember when the story came out about Aziz Ansari on Babe.net, like, all of the women who'd ever worked with him were suddenly expected to comment about it. Like, not even women who dated him, who just worked with him. Same thing with Matt Lauer. When it came out that he was a serial abuser, his female colleagues were expected to make statements. And there are cases where women are complicit, but there are also cases where they might not have known, or they knew they didn't have the power because there are so many men who prop up abuse in Hollywood. And I just think it's interesting the way Me Too has also in so many cases been twisted to put all of these women in really awkward situations where they're somehow held a little bit responsible for what these men they happen to know did.
I really struggle with that too. I always go back to the example of Whitney Cummings, and she had her sitcom for a while. I believe it was back in 2011 with comedian Chris D'Elia when he was accused of his own assault allegations. She didn't make a comment for quite a while, and the pressure ended up being put on her, and she's a bigger name than Chris D'Elia. So I started to see more of the headlines being, when is Whitney going to comment on this? Rather than, here's what Chris D'Elia did. And then when she finally did comment, she said, I had a good experience with him. I also believe these victims, but I also feel like this pressure is on me, and I don't know what I can say without being the one who's then getting torched. And it was actually a really great comment. I encourage you to look it up, but now, where do things stand today? Well, pretty well for Marilyn, even as he continues to be under federal investigation. None other than Kanye West invited him to collaborate on his recent album, Donda, and for that, Marilyn earned a Grammy nomination. He also was recently married to Lindsay Usich. Meanwhile, Evan is deep in a custody battle over her son with ex Jamie Bell. Recent court documents revealed that Marilyn had allegedly threatened to rape her 8-year-old in retaliation to her allegations. Yeah, and so Evan moved to Nashville, away from her home in LA. For the record, some of Marilyn's other victims have said he has threatened the same to their children, with one even having allegedly recording him saying so. Now, in an attempt to reclaim her narrative of all of this, Evan has also documented her decision to come forward in a 2-part HBO documentary called Phoenix Rising, which will debut over the next few months. So be sure to check that out. Now, this brings us to our very final segment, Hindsight is 2022, where we choose the one moment that we might have handled differently if we were the subject of the story.
I shouldn't have done that.
Sarah, what would that be for you?
If I had been Michael Moore directing Bowling for Columbine, I would have probed a bit more when I interviewed Marilyn Manson. I think that his answers were a cop-out. And we didn't necessarily have the vocabulary to discuss toxic masculinity back then, but that was what he was promoting. And I think that Michael Moore had an opportunity to create a dialogue about, like, well, what should we be glamorizing with our youth? Should we be presenting violence as a viable way to act like a man and assert control over your life? So I think I probably would have had a more nuanced conversation with Marilyn Manson instead of that interview, which just sort of, I think it kind of glorifies him, frankly. And I don't think we should be scapegoating him for Columbine. But I also think that if we're going to say somebody like Charlton Heston is complicit because he's a spokesperson for the NRA, and I mean, obviously the NRA is more to blame for Columbine than rock music. But if you're going to hold people like that accountable for glamorizing gun culture, then glamorizing violence and toxic masculinity is something that I also think we have to have a discussion about. Because when you're a rock star, yes, you are an artist, and we can separate the art from the artist, but you also have an image, and that image can make you a role model. And what are you promoting as a role model? Like that, in his case, we now know in retrospect was pretty problematic.
Yeah. And I think what this case reminds us is that domestic abuse has been normalized, not just for famous people, but our normal, regular old society too. You know, we still put such a massive stigma on those who stay, those who don't name names, and even those who leave. I mean, it's really a lose-lose process when it comes to perception, and the brunt is always on the victim. And I would just love to see this conversation change. You know, with Marilyn, we were told by him directly that he's a piece of shit as early as the 90s, and nobody listened to it. And I just wonder that if even one person that he worked with at that time had stood up and said something, I mean, that's what I would have liked to see. And I'm looking at you, Trent Reznor. Very mad at Trent Reznor.
Absolutely.
By the way, I do want to make one note to what you were saying earlier, Sarah, because I totally agree. But I do want to say, when we say things like the influence of Marilyn Manson, we're not saying that rock music is bad and that rock music does these things. We're saying the individual. We're saying this artist. There's so many great rock artists who don't put this image out there and then laugh when somebody suggests that they have a negative impact. He stands apart.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think when we talk about toxic masculinity, it infiltrates every part of our society. Like Bill Clinton is an example of toxic masculinity. So is Scott Fitzgerald. So is Marilyn Manson. I think the issue with this is that there are role models, no matter what you like as a teen boy, politics or rock music or literature, that suggest abusing women is the way to assert yourself as a man.
Yeah, none of this shit is cool, and Marilyn Manson is a fucking creep and an asshole, and it's time to leave him in the past. And honestly, I think he should be behind bars, and hopefully that'll be the way that the story ends, and it likely won't be because he is very famous, and we've seen how far even a president can take things without going behind bars. It's unfortunate, but I do want to say that one beautiful thing that came out of this is the Phoenix Act, created, of course, by Evan Rachel Wood. So why don't we close out with her speaking about what made the act happen and its power in a 2019 interview with NBC's Maria Shriver.
I'm proud. I'm saddened by the circumstances that brought me here. I wish that wasn't my story. I don't like that that's my story. But if my truth can move progress forward, I feel like now is the time to share that truth, even if it's ugly.
Was there a moment where you're like, no, I'm going to change my story, or my story is going to be more full story?
Well, that's exactly why I named it the Phoenix Act. You might be in the ashes, but you can rise out of them. That moment for me happened when it became not about me anymore.
If any of our listeners are experiencing or have survived intimate partner violence, we encourage you to seek support. In Canada, please call the Domestic Violence Helpline at 1-800-563-0808. If you are in America, please call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 800-799-SAFE. If you are based anywhere else, you can contact the Violence Prevention Alliance. Remember, you are worthy of being safe. And that brings us to the end of this episode. Now, if you want to hear more from me, you can find me at Sarah Sahakian. Sadaf, where can our listeners find you?
Listeners can find me at _Sadaf Asan. And if you liked this podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe so other listeners can find us. Thanks for listening. Now, in the days since we recorded this episode, there has been one unfortunate development. In early March, Marilyn filed a lawsuit against Evan and her alleged romantic partner, Ilma Gore, accusing them of using fraud, conspiracy, and defamation to ruin his career. He claims they not only made up the abuse allegations, but hacked into his computer and social media, even impersonating an FBI agent. He's requesting a trial by jury. Really? Evan has yet to respond, but if this is a sign of anything, it's that Marilyn does not plan to make any of this easy on his alleged victims. What a winner.